Hi folks, I'm International Master John Watson, and this is Ask the Master on ICC TV. The main idea of this show is to provide listeners, viewers with the chance to ask questions about chess and the chess world, and also to talk with each other on the chat channel. You can send questions to me in advance by email, which is really the best way, askimwatson@chessclub.com, or you can message me on ICC at John L. Watson, JOHNLWATSON. So you just go message, space, John L. Watson, and then you type your question. And the alternative is to ask live right now. Let me check this YouTube channel. There we go. Here's the chat. You can ask me anything there, and you can also talk to each other on the chat as we go along. So let me say, first of all, I guess what you can ask about or what the show's about, and really you can ask about anything. We've talked about pretty much everything from history to current events to predictions to things like that. But the usual topics, there's been a lot of openings, which I have listed on because I'm sort of an opening expert, or I write opening books anyway, and those are listed on the Facebook page, John L. Watson. So I've listed all of the shows and what openings were covered. I haven't really listed the other topics. I probably should, but that's a little bit abstract because we go over so much. But I also talk about chess strategy, advice for playing advice, training, that kind of thing, and chess books, chess videos, and so forth. And of course you can ask anything that comes to mind. And as I say, go ahead and chat with the fellow chat members who are not on right now. So either I'm seeing it wrong in my view, or for the first time in quite some time, we aren't getting the chat up. I'm not sure why that is. I think I'll continue though. And by the way, you can listen to this show later on YouTube. So, and let me get this position off of here, by the way. Very abstract, right? And so if you miss this, or if you miss any part of it, or if you just want to see it repeated, maybe take down some of the lines or look at the analysis, this will be repeated. This will be archived permanently on YouTube, and you can watch it for free. So before getting to some of the questions I've been sent, as usual, I'm going to talk about earlier questions. Although actually the first one I got was very recent, and it was by my message on John L. Watson. Okay, here's the question. The eternal question is how to get better at the game. Particularly we older players who do not have as much time to devote to the game anymore have hit a ceiling after so many years, say 2,000 or 2,100 USCF. We devote so much time to the game but become stuck after a point. I think that what holds us back, this is still the viewer asking, I think that what holds us back most is that we have developed habits or ways of thinking during the game which have served us well enough over the years to get to this level, but no further. We try to work on our game, but under the pressure of the ticking clock to fall to old habits, say of not considering enough candidate moves or ideas, or sloppy calculation, or even non-tactical positions, for example. So my question is there any real hope for us, and if so, what are the best and most practical and productive ways forward in the OTB play? And he adds, we have jobs and a non-chess life by now. Well, this is very, very typical question that I get from people who want to be students or people who are just out there wondering what to do. And it's a question that I struggle with myself. Jonathan Rowson and I actually had a correspondence about this some years back. And he was rather pessimistic about teaching older players. But to be fair, we were talking about people who didn't have a lot of time to put into the game. And I think there is a point at which your ability to improve, your likelihood of improving isn't good, say if you're 50 or older especially, unless you're being very focused and sort of systematically putting some good studying and practice into the game. So I've been playing again recently after a lengthy break, none too successfully, but maybe okay. Especially online, I've been playing well. I don't know why that is, in these matches and things. But over the board, there are a lot of problems. And of course, I've been wondering then about the same kinds of questions. I tend to teach kids for the most part for the last 40 years or so. But I have had older students over the years. I always have at least one or two. And by older, I really just mean, I think the question is probably talking about from ages 30 on through 70 or whatever. Um, just because I get the idea that this is someone who's played chess a fair amount when he was younger and now is very settled and has been trying for a while. So at least during his 20s, he's been trying to maintain his strength or get better, but is now at least 30, probably older. And of course, everyone has different experiences. And some of the students I've gotten who are older, they've had no luck really. They haven't really gotten anywhere. We've played with this and that, but they've maybe lacked true interest in either doing the work, or even when they do the work, they don't really have time to play enough. Their jobs exhaust them. This is very important, and their lives exhaust them. Family life and that sort of thing. But then on the other hand, I've had a few older people that have done great and have in fact had the goal of achieving their earlier rankings, and this is quite a bit older people, and they've made that, and even sometimes two of the people I've had that I can think of made master who'd never made master before. So it is possible. You're probably not going to become world champion if you start studying really hard at age 45 or 50 or something, but you can certainly do well. So I'm cautious, and I would say that it's very difficult. It's going to be an up and down process, but having said that, I think the most important thing from the teacher's point of view, just to give you the teacher's point of view, is whether you can spot weaknesses or consistent problems that are holding your students back. So someone probably should go over your games, a large set of your games, and take some time to identify patterns. I do this first off when I get a student. And here are a couple of typical problems I've worked on with older players. One is, believe it or not, excess caution and passivity. Because I think they're just afraid of getting beaten in the opening, or there's just a point where they don't want to lose more than they want to win, in a sense. And this also burns up a lot of time. Playing passively tends to give you time issues also. Another major one is they aren't doing systematic blunder checking, and I find that's happened to me actually, that I forget now to look every single move. It's simple moves that I might have to just finish the game or play, win material or do something aggressive. Just real quickly, you should always glance over for just radical moves. And then before you make your move, you want to do some blunder checking. You say, well, I'm planning to make this move. Does the person have any immediate checkmates and attacks, captures of pieces, forcing moves, all that sort of thing? Oh, here we go. Jonathan Rousen has an interesting Twitter feed. I didn't know that. I can see that my chat is going off the screen here. Oh, there we go. Now I can see everything. Well, hello everybody. Some of the usual suspects, and Remy Edits is back. I see you bought the book about the Sveshnikov. It's pretty good, isn't it? Well, thank you. You're welcome. So to continue, I think that's one problem. And another problem is, as I say, just not searching for tactical opportunities. Every move. You have to do it every move, because it's usually a move that you don't expect it to happen, that there'll be some strange move that at first looks stupid but actually works for either you or your opponent, both of which can be very, very important. Okay, another thing, of course, which we talked about a couple weeks ago, is time management. Almost everybody seems to have this problem. I certainly have had a lot of trouble with that. I think that older players especially think that they can make decisions as quickly as they did when they were younger, so they don't really worry. They think of time pressure as something different. It used to be when they had 5 minutes for 5 moves or something, well, that was just fine. Or if they were on an increment of 30 seconds, well, I can handle that pretty well. And it turns out, for a whole variety of reasons, I won't get into it, but I think there's a lot of different reasons this can happen, but essentially you're just slower. And not even because you're mentally slower in general, but partly just because of the practical, over-the-board aspects of things, and nerves, and not being in the right mode all the time. So I think the real solution is simply you have to reserve yourself more time. The only games I've lost recently, I just didn't leave myself enough time, and it was a disaster. So we talked about, you want to go back a couple shows and talk about the various time trouble solutions or problems, times management ideas, including the good old marking your score sheet and making goals for how many moves you're going to make within a certain amount of time. So you can go back and look at that. And I think the real issue is you can overthink positions, because maybe because you want to fully understand the position, but that's just not realistic. over the board. You have to pick, as I said before, I won't go into a lot of detail, but you have to pick, try and get better and better at finding what the critical positions are, the ones with a lot of tactics, maybe the ones that the game is going to change radically if you or your opponent makes some important decision, and that tends to be just 3 or 4 a game, often at most, and that's where you put your time in. So the other thing is you have to address these bad habits if you've found them, or if your coach has found them, very consciously and systematically, because whatever program or resolutions that you have to try to improve, whatever you're going to apply yourself, it's important to play more. So, and not worry about the ups and downs of ratings. You really just can't afford to at this point. The rating will go up if you're working hard and studying and making sense of things. So playing is probably more important than anything, and since most players in the situation you talk about don't have time to play constantly, I mean, they're lucky maybe to get in one 5-round tournament a month, maybe not even that. And some people I know, they play 2 times a year, 3 times a year. So luckily now we have a good way to test your techniques and your knowledge and your practical playing ability, maybe more important than anything, under the clock, which is to play online. So I suggest playing online. I think that for older players, Blitz tends to be counterproductive. I mean, you should just play a few Blitz games for fun, as a kind of lighthearted entertainment, because if you start taking it seriously, even for preparation, it's not it's just not that useful. It can really hurt you. It can cement your bad habits, and I think that's even been sort of shown statistically. I won't get into that, but so try to play longer games. I know it's hard to find them sometimes, but you know, ideally 30 minutes or more. Try and find those on there are people willing to play those things, because they want to get serious practice too. There are a lot of 15-minute games. That would be my minimum amount of time, but they're useful. 15 minutes at least. You have to think, you have to deal with the clock efficiently, and you get in sort of a competitive situation, which is similar to a tournament over the board. So and finally, I think players who've been stuck with playing the same openings for years, which are usually very safe ones from what I've seen for older players, might use these practice games to incorporate some sharp openings, or sharper openings anyway, into your repertoire, and just practice playing with sharp openings, even if you don't intend to play them at tournaments, although I think you probably will. You'll find that you create more problems. You'll have fewer longer games that are exhausting and make these tournaments difficult if you play a little bit more sharply, because otherwise you're the last one standing at each round, and pretty soon all of a sudden you collapse and you go, well, I was tired. So take some chances and hang tough. That's the best I can do. It's not an incredibly optimistic answer, but I think I've seen it. I've seen improvement be possible. I'm expecting some for myself. So there you have it. Okay, let's see what we've got on the hello everybody. Jonathan Russell, I should get to that. I should probably subscribe to that Twitter feed. Thank you, English Refugee. More than chess. Well, yeah, he has so many interests, doesn't he? If you're an ICC member, English Refugee, I have 2 interviews with Jonathan Rowson that I thought were some of the best we ever had on my interview show. They're in the ICC archives. So you might want to look at that. Okay, in the absence of actual questions on the chat, I've prepared all kinds of things. Slightly older question I got has to do with a position. Now, you can send me positions in games. I think I mentioned that, and I've gotten very few of them, but the ones we've had have been fun. This is a position I was sent, and usually we don't get an abstract question like this by a pretty advanced player, by the way. Wrong game. Let me do that again. The question is, which one is it? I guess it's this one. Let me see if I get that. There we go. He sent me this position and said, Fritz 11 tells me I have a winning position here, and at the time I figured I was vastly superior. But I do not win it, and I might well have lost it. Moreover, even today, when I'm analyzing these games for my chess-based collection, I do not see ways to make progress. What should I be doing? Well, I think this is really a fascinating position. And, you know, ideally, you're supposed to sit down and sort of look at the ideas and figure out what you're doing. So let me do that. Now, it's not realistic to get too involved, because you really need to make moves, and you need to keep your clock going. So in reality, you have to combine thinking about ideas with concrete kind of moves. But let me just talk about generally what's going on. First of all, look at black. Black's pawn breaks, such as he has them, I don't know, g5, d5, b5, they're all very weakening, unrealistic. Most of them lose material. It's just not going to be easy. He could try to connect rooks, maybe by, for example, queen c7 would be an idea, and then bishop maybe d7, and then rook a d8 or something. But this is very awkward, and it's really hard to do because queen c7, well, just for example, if it was black's move, let me make a random move here, and if black played there, I believe the move knight d5 wins. Yeah, see, that wins because of the double attack on e8 and c7. So it's hard to get reorganized. And where else does the queen go? d8 is awkward for other reasons, and I won't really analyze that, but just to show you that. Now, so really the point here is black can't do anything. Now that's a great sign, or it has trouble doing anything. There is this move knight e5, which right away you can just defend fairly easily, but you can also play the move d4, which is what I'm going to recommend as the first move anyway. So how about white? What can white do? Well, if white wants to get pawn breaks, I guess c5 is a possibility, d5 is a possibility, g4, g5. Actually, even a4, a5, a6 is kind of interesting because it can create weaknesses on the queen side. This is the nice thing about having more space and having two bishops, by the way. You have the bishop pair. So the question is, can you win by pawn breaks, or can you just do piece moves alone because you have more space and active pieces? The first thing you might think about is just how to get some pawn breaks, like c5. And one way to think about this, let me make a move and go back to clear off those arrows. One way to think about this is this bishop is the worst placed piece. What might you do with that? Well, a3 is arguably a nice place for it. So you might try to play bishop here and off to a3, and then enforce c5. And if he ever plays d5, which is the only way to keep things solid without letting the bishops all free, then you have d4 and c4. And you can't really, you're attacking d5, if he takes it, your knight comes swinging in. Things like that. That's a general way to think about it, and I could give a few examples of that. But it's a little awkward because black can probably play queen d8. If you're trying to get a bishop to a3, maybe the queen can come out to a5 and sort of harass you. So it's a little bit awkward. So that may not be the best way. It'd be more efficient to try and find some way of just doing things with pieces. And as I said, I start out with that move. Now the first thing to do is say, look, can I just win straightforwardly by taking over the e-file? And in fact, this is not so bad, because queen takes threatens check, or going to the 7th rank, probably check, because that's going to pin all the pieces down. So that's quite a huge idea. And black would probably start bringing his knight over. And then now you want to watch out here because of this cute little move, which is nice. And I just wanted to mention that that's a big advantage of having d4 in, is to cut off black's only good square for his knight, or any of his knights for that matter. So another point to have that in. But instead of that, you could just play, for example, just a simple move like that. And you've definitely got an advantage here. I don't think I'll go into any detail. You might put the rook here and keep working on this long diagonal. And you can slowly advance in the center. So this is an advantage. It's not a huge advantage, though. In fact, I think it gives away a little of your advantage. So what else can you do? Another move you can make is this. And if knight e5, which is certainly natural, so you're trying to get the queen on just a more aggressive square, then, for example, come back, pinning the knight, threatening d4, and something like this. And now you have maybe f4 ideas are a possibility, with the queen just entering into the position, and sometimes d4 ideas. It's still not totally convincing. I think the easiest way to do this is to go ahead and play d4, which is the move let me try this, that move. And stopping knight e5 and thinking about c5 at some point, or maybe even d5. Now, the only reason you don't want this pawn structure is because of that square, but with black's pieces so passively placed, really undeveloped, and far away, the knight's far, far away from being able to attack c4, it's not really a weakness, it's just a pawn that covers more central squares. So d4 is a safe move, and it's a good move. The other square to worry about is e4, but clearly you've got more control of that. He's not going to get a knight there. So that would be my first move. And let me just show you an example that I sort of came up with. Now, once again, queen c7, you have knight d5, winning material, and queen d8. Oh, I just show a really simple thing. Let's put that knight here, where it's obviously well placed anyway. Captures, bishop takes. That knight is too strong here. Something has to be done with it. E7 is kind of hanging, and these squares are very vulnerable, so he's probably going to take that. But now you have two bishops versus two knights, and the light squares, and this is just not what you want. And you might even activate the other piece. Notice I'm not moving any pawns yet. I don't want to create any weaknesses. But bishops, the more space they have, notice that my bishops are active now. We've talked about this before. Bishops will win by themselves unless black has some outpost or activity, or can win material, or has space, which he certainly doesn't have. So you can pretty much count on that being a winning position. So it's fantastic. It's a great position to look at. So let me just show you what I came up with. D4, knight F8, I think is the best move. And now this kind of nice move. This is a concrete move. There's plenty of ways to try and proceed, as we just saw, but I like this one. The idea is just go like that, break down the long diagonal, and then, of course, once you win that pawn, you'll be winning the D5 square also for a knight. And all sorts of good things will happen. So the natural thing to do is to go here. I give a quick line with, let me see how my time's doing. Okay, let's do this very quickly. Now again, that allows knight F5. That's a move you want to get in, is knight F5. So once again, we're doing this kind of thing. Probably pretty similar to the last game. Well, just again, he has to play bishop takes F5 probably. So, and for example, if he tries to simplify a little, how about this move threatening A6? And if he tries to stop A6, then this is even better. This move is absolutely killing. You're threatening this, the knight has nowhere to go. That's the main point. There's no counterattack. So is there anything to even try here? I guess, oh well, you can try there, but then bishop H3. And you're starting to clean up the queen side. And you have two bishops, so that will win. Okay. Looks pretty straightforward, but you know, you have to kind of think about what's going on here. That's why the queen has to protect this square. So I have black stopping A5, but that creates a weakness. And now my main line is bishop C1, and I don't think I'm going to go into that too deeply. I'll just show you real quickly, now that the queen can't get to A5, the bishop on A3 is extremely strong. In fact, let me just kind of run through the moves. I'm not going to show you in detail, but these are the moves that I came up with. And now there's a problem with a tactic here, which is knight takes here. For example, if he plays something like this move, this is actually winning, because you're on E8 too, for example. Here, now you're threatening knight here. So that's just winning material and more. And if he plays sort of a neutral move, something like this, then that creates big weaknesses. And this is actually a good move. It's a tactical move. What happens is, now you're on this, you also have that pinned. So he has to win his piece back. And then it doesn't really matter which way he takes. We'll just try one of them, something like this. And takes and takes and takes. Now you've got two pawns for the piece, and this can't move without losing this one, and you're on this one followed by that one. And you can always queen your pawns after you take all those pawns. It's really that simple. Not surprising. These bishops will eventually sort of convert themselves, and also a nice piece like that is usually a very good sign. So after bishop E3, let me see. Oh yeah, so he stops this queen G4 check. I didn't mention that, by the way. There was a point about taking twice here and playing queen G4 check and capturing on that square. So H5 stops that, but then D5 is very strong. And white makes a pseudo-sacrifice, but you'll see that it's the same thing. Now there's no more queen G4 tricks, but there's that move pinning this and attacking there. So white gets his piece back. I won't do any more detail there. The one thing I do want to show you, though, is probably the other way to win, which you would see if you had plenty of time or had really good judgment or were a grandmaster or something, which is to play, okay, I've already played the A4, A5. This move is very strong, even though it looks more complicated because you're sacrificing a pawn, but in fact, once you start looking at this, you can see it's really overwhelming. Because you're on that square, you're on all the dark squares, you can take that back now and stick a knight there in a lot of cases. And I guess a really quick variation I gave here was capturing, is that right? Yeah. Okay, queen D8 looks just so awful. Oh, that's right, this is a huge move. So that's probably forced. Now this is still coming, this kind of move. And here, rook A6, bishop E3, well, two bishops in a huge bind, and look how horrible that rook is. It turns out if the rook had gone anywhere else there were problems too, but I won't go into that. Knight up, bishop up. Don't know if we need to go much further here. Queen C7 I give us the best move. F4 was a real problem. So bishop here, here F4 anyway, knight back, bishop back attacking the rook, rook back, queen E7. Yeah, this is worth showing just because black doesn't even have it. This is really zigzag actually. Not to mention that you have the idea of bishop F5. So black can't even move, so it's kind of a funny position. I mean, I guess there's a few legal moves, but it's pretty horrendous. Okay, enough of that example. I just want to show you, that's maybe kind of how you think about a position like this. You've got long-term advantages, so all you need is either a pawn break or just good piece play. And in this case, piece play seemed to be superior. It's not always pawn breaks. Usually you're going to need a pawn break. Okay, what have we got here? I just got Zurich 1953. What's your favorite tourney book? Yeah, we just had this question, and it's again, I don't know if you guys get new in Chess Magazine, but there's an article. Jeremy Silman's writing an article. We all have to list favorite books and things like that. And I mentioned that, as I've mentioned many places, and many other people have too, for years I heard this, but I just found out recently that the Najdorf book on Zurich 1953 is just a superb book. It's a recent edition put out by Russell Enterprises, and for years, and it's been in Spanish, it hasn't been translated, and now it's been translated, and for years my friends have always told me that's the greatest book. That's the one to get, not Bronstein's book, which is actually pretty overrated. I think the fact that it was so available to so many people, it was one of their few chess books, made people, and it's such a dramatic tournament with such great players, made it sort of a classic, but in fact I think it doesn't stand the test of time very well. The Najdorf book is much better, has much more side information, is just better written, better notes, and has more drama. So that's something. As far as other tournament books, in the old days there was New York 1924, for example, that I grew up with. In modern days there aren't very many tournament books being put out, but they're very good. The Curaçao book, New in Chess by Timon, the Saint Remy book by Quality Chess, fantastic book with good stuff by Marin. Just a great book. I'm so glad they did that too, because they probably didn't make any money on it. Making tournament books these days doesn't ever seem to do well, and I think it was great that Quality Chess just said we're going to do this because it's it's just such a good thing to do and so interesting. Have there been recent tournament books? Not very many, have there? I'll think about that. Maybe I'll get to that next week, and I'll think about more current, modern tournament books. Some of the early ones are fantastic. The old Carlsbad 1911 book. A lot of these are being reproduced. There's a couple publishers you might want to look up. One was Kaisa Editions. That's Dale Brandreth. And the other one is Russell Enterprises, which I just mentioned. They're putting out a lot of old tournament books, and they're really excellent. Some of them are translated. Most of them are previous editions, but they've got added annotations. A couple of them are new about older tournaments. So these are all classic tournament books, and they're actually all uniformly good. But there aren't that many overall compared to opening and endgame books and all of that. What do you think about the Paul moving pieces aimlessly? I don't know why. Oh, we're going way back. Okay, let's do this here. Hi, Anthony Gutierrez. Hi, Anthony. What do you recommend against the A6 Slav? Ooh, that's a tough one. It depends which for A6. There's E3 A6 and there's Knight F3 A6. I'm going to have to come back to that. That's one of those broad questions. So I'll definitely get to it next week if I don't get to it now. I want to show you some other things this week. But that's a great question, and I'll address that because it's a fascinating system. I just got blah blah. Okay, what do you think about the Paulson Sicilian? Another incredibly general question. I did very badly with the Paulson Sicilian myself. I think it's a fun opening. It's a great opening. It was my main Sicilian, and somehow I didn't. Well, let me get a neutral board up here, or let me get the next thing I'm going to show anyway, which is by the same questioner, actually. I've got a question from the same person, and it's actually number, okay, here we go, 124, I think. We'll find out in a second. Yeah, okay, so this is a great question that he's asking anyway. So we've got two from the same person, Kirk Kazarian. He's asking about the Paulson. I'm not going to, I mean, again, I could go on for 2 hours about the Paulson. I played it myself for years and years. It was always my Sicilian system, and I did terribly with it. I think I'm more of a space and development guy, maybe. At least I did terribly against Grandmasters. I beat a lot of lower players, but Grandmasters just killed me. I don't know. I can't remember drawing one with this system, so I finally got disillusioned with it. But objectively, it's absolutely fine. This is called the Paulson system, also known as the Kahn variation. Sometimes people say the Paulson system is where you play the knight to this square. So it's like a Scheveningen. But mostly people just call these moves the Paulson system or the Kahn variation. They're both called that. And white can play here or here and try to get pressure in the center. I guess what I would say is that I still think it's good. There's good players that play it, like Peter Svidler. And I see it at tournaments all the time. But of the choices, it's probably not quite as sound as some of the other Sicilians. They're not, it's sound, but it's not quite as easy to play, and arguably objectively maybe even just slightly worse. This is a form of timing off Sicilian here, and or a type of Paulson is the other way to look at it, is with the knight here, and that's very popular these days. And the idea is to play normal timing off moves, but the timing is important because white doesn't get his knight to b5 for one thing. So, and also it's better against g3 systems to not have moved the queen yet. That's kind of obscure, but that's sort of the idea. So maybe I'll address that next week, give a sample Paulson variation, but I can't say everything about it right now. Okay, if you learned, whoops. I think if Americans learned off by heart simple strategy, they would be as good or better than the Soviet Union ever was. Well, I don't know. Soviet Union was pretty good. I think most top Americans and professionals know strategy extremely well, but that's okay. You can post things more than once, since I tend to yeah, that's right. I can always get another email, but I try to copy this chat. I didn't last week. I try to just make a copy of it and then address it later. So thanks very much. Okay, the Noteboom. Oh yeah, great tournament, Avro 38. I don't. Then there's a new book on it, which is a big improvement actually. The original book, the tournament itself is absolutely classic. The book on it maybe not so classic. The Noteboom variation of semi-Slav is an okay opening. Well, that's a terrific question. I'll just show what the Noteboom is. Yeah, that's quite interesting. So let's just take a semi-Slav variation of some sort, like, whoops, like this. And instead of playing knight f6 here, black captures immediately and doesn't commit the knight there. And then the Noteboom goes on forever. But for example, what am I doing? I'm doing, of course this is common, but what am I doing here? Sorry. Oh, I know what I'm doing. A4. Wow, what is wrong with me? Someone give me some help here. I'm blanking here. E3. Oh wait, it's black's move. So you're getting b5 in, right? So how are you doing that? You're playing bishop b4, but not yet, right? Bishop b2. Here. Takes. Is that right? Yeah, and here you have d5 as a possibility, but you also have b3. Those are the moves here. And black usually plays a5. For example, b3, a5, takes here. I can't believe I'm having trouble doing this. I feel like I should have e3 in already. But, wow, bad memory. Anyway, yeah, and the d5 variation, by the way, is extremely interesting. It's been revived a little bit. This idea of playing d5 immediately in this kind of position. And then black has to defend against this. And I'm apologizing. I just feel incredibly dumb here, like I'm messing things up. Someone want to give me an actual order here? What is wrong with me? This is absolutely awful that I'm doing this. Yeah, I mean you could get it this way. Is this right? I'm completely crazy. Oops, bishop d2. Someone bail me out here. I'm so embarrassed. Oh, here we go. a5 now, and then here. Wow. Now we got it. That looks more like it. Okay, here we got. This is the main line of the Noteboom. Thank you very much. How embarrassing. And after this, the idea is that that if black takes, you have capture. So what black does instead is he develops. And in what order? I guess knight here first. And then plays his, oh no, you have to defend your rook. So you play here first. The idea now is that white doesn't have bishop takes b4 because the rook is defended here. And then we get this position. And this is the Noteboom variation. And it used to be thought that white could get small advantages with moves like c5 and rook c1. And a lot of times now they play very cautiously with bishop e2 or bishop d3. I think the verdict is still at white somewhat better. These pawns are fairly easy to blockade, even though they look incredibly strong because they're two-passed pawns. It's the old thing about center being better than flank. But in fact, the book on the semi-Slav, which recommends the Noteboom, the guy who does the chess publishing column, Shevchenko, he defends it and he gives it a lot of variations. I think I improved for white on a couple of the variations he gave. But still, if white has any advantage, it's just tiny. So I think it's quite playable, not very popular on the top levels because I think white gets these minuscule advantages, these very depressing minuscule advantages. The other thing I was going to mention is I do think, and I already did mention it, finally I got this, I can't believe I couldn't get this, that this d5 move, which I used to play by the way, has turned out to be a little better than it's supposed to be in this position. So somehow that's worked out a little better. And wow, this works. Oh, I know what happens. Okay, I'm getting it now finally, I think. Is it after b3? It's after b3, excuse me. Okay. So it's here, here, and now d5. And then you simply capture this, and you've sort of won the d4 square, and then you take. And now we got it. This is it. And a lot of times there's moves like queen here or here, and if black plays on, then you have moves like queen a4 check and knight d4. And this has all been worked out years ago to be okay for black, but very interesting and exciting. And there was an innovation recently, so you might want to look into this line. There was a way for white, and it looked to me to get some minor advantage, but that's just what I saw a couple of months ago, and I didn't examine it really carefully because I don't play this stuff myself anymore. Now against the Noteboom, there's plenty of other things you can do. I've had fun playing, and this one I'm a little more familiar with, playing this order against this, which is very similar to the semi-Slav gambit with if, and it transposes if black plays here, but of course black has a lot of other options. We're going here very early, waiting with knight f6. I still think white gets plenty of play here. I think this is a really fun line, g3. Okay, because of time, I think I'll go zooming along. I'm sorry, Dragomir Soren, that I was so confused, but I think maybe that's a bit of an answer. So I think yes, it's okay. You'll notice the top players don't play it very much, and that's a little worrisome. I think it's because of that first line I showed, where white plays c5, and in spite of what Sherbakov says in his book, which is a brilliant book, absolutely fantastic, all kinds of original ideas. It's called the Triangle System. In spite of what he says in that book, I think white gets a little advantage in a couple of those lines. Not too serious, but enough to discourage maybe black from playing it at the very highest professional level. Yes, the g3, it's a form of Catalan. It can actually transpose into one of the Catalan gambits. One of the Catalan gambits that I think is better for white than the usual Catalan gambits with g3. So you guys are making terrific points here. Okay. The Vienna is earlier. Well, we'll talk about the Vienna at some other point. Let me quickly get to some stuff, though, because we have some older questions and some newer ones. Let me show you the game you have up in front of you. This is a great question. It's this opening in the London system. It's what happens when white plays the London system against the King's Indian. And the question is, and this is something that's going to probably benefit anybody on either side, any d4 player, London player, but also King's Indian players are going to want to know about this kind of thing. So I'll talk about h3. If you skip h3, I think maybe you should skip h3, I'm starting to think, but it does have other issues. Let me just show you this for a second. Now the main line, you know, there's a new book, maybe I should mention too, on the London system. I forgot about this, by Alfonso Romero and Oscar de Prada. It's co-authored, called The Agile London System. I don't know what's agile about it. You know, these titles are so silly. You know, everything's winning with or attacking, the attacking London or something. Or there's this recent book that's called the aggressive something, and it has to do with the E4 E5 repertoire that is very passive for black. So it's quite funny. It says, I guess the publisher wanted to say aggressive, but it's not aggressive at all. It's about as like a lot of E5 systems. It's ultra solid. Anyway, back to the lesson, the lecture questions. Let me talk about the move order for a second, about this h3 move. Over the years, the main system for black has been to play for e5. So let me show you that. Let's say that you play h3 early, like you do here, and bishop e2. So let's go ahead and play that h3 move, which would be right here and here. Now the main system, now he's asking about this move, and we'll get to that. The main system for years was to play for e5, for example, and play either queen e8, and then let's say here and here, and when the bishop moves back, you just play queen e7. The other way you can get to that, by the way, just for the record, so you won't get confused over the board, is if he plays e6, it's actually the same number of tempi, because white will play the same moves, but actually that's not quite true, because you have an extra option this time. But at any rate, you can often get the same position exactly doing this kind of thing. Okay, that's with h3, and the good thing about that is that you can play. Let me just show you this. Knight bd7, let's say, c4 immediately, and then now knight here, and bishop back. And this position is actually kind of fun for white. And here's the reason it's fun. Well, this is well known as being a pretty good position for white, and at least a very attractive start. And one of the main points is against the most natural move. You play like this. You play for c5, and you get some advantage. It's a good reason to play against the London. The point I wanted to make, though, is that if you play the same order with say bishop e2 instead of h3. Let's look at that for a second. So let's say bishop e2. So these move order things are really kind of fascinating. Knight here. Yeah, let's say c4. Queen here. And now actually there is a question at some point of saving the bishop, so you do play here at some point. Black plays like this, white goes back, and now black has this nice freeing move, knight e4, which is really stops white from getting his pieces out quickly and frees the f-pawn, and this is considered pretty equal. It's still playable for both sides, but it's pretty equal. Now the point is if white had skipped castling there, then he wouldn't have to allow that. So for example, if he played c4 immediately, well, let's get h3 in. It doesn't hurt to get h3 in. In this case, it doesn't hurt. Queen e8, knight c3 first. Then after this, there's no longer any way to get the knight to e4. So that's something London players should know about, and black players should know about in this case. And here you can just castle, and there was no knight e4 freeing move, and so white's quite happy. That's a very important move order that you got because you played h3 and you didn't castle. Now here's the problem. If you play h3, as in this game, let me just go back. Let me just get back to where we were. h3, there we are. Then there's a different issue. Now you're ready for the e5 idea, but the c5 idea, which is what the viewer asked about, yes, knight fd7 is definitely playable, and knight c6 e5. That's a pretty interesting line. It's fun. It's a fun line. It's one I would really recommend. Some people think white gets a small advantage there. This book thinks white gets a small advantage. What he's talking about is playing knight fd7 here. It's a a lot of top players have played this way because they want to play aggressively. The idea is just to play here and here, and usually g5, and just get a big attack going. I'm not sure if I would play this against a really strong player. I feel like white gets a positional advantage that I'm not real thrilled with. But against almost anybody lower, it might be a good idea because you get big attacking chances, and no one likes to be attacked, and it's very hard to play. No one's going to refute it. They just might get some small advantage against it if they play well. All right, so in this game, okay, we're talking about c5, and that's the question, what to do about, and here's the question. The question was what to do about this order. And now let me just, should I go back or should I do it now? Let me say something. Normally, you'd think white might just want to castle and keep things open. And then if bishop e6, which is what the question's about, you'll see that in a second, I think c4 is a good move. I think this one works pretty well, because after that you can either just develop, because queen takes is going to let a rook down to the 7th. You don't want to do that after rook b1. Or you can even play this move and have, I think, a small advantage, because the bishop doesn't really belong here, and these are well-known kinds of positions. That this particular one, I think, favors white a little. So, but unfortunately what black would do is play here right away, and that's because you didn't make any queenside moves like knight here or c3, which means that this piece is hard to defend. This pawn is hard to defend. One problem is, well, b3 creates dark square weaknesses along the long diagonal and wastes time. It's a very dangerous move. Even a knight d5 might come at some point, a knight here, and it's just too slow. And queen c1 exposes you along this file, and also maybe has some particular tactical issues. You're attacking that and here, and this is opening up. But even if white consolidates somehow, let's say white gets, let's say you couldn't take that pawn twice, which maybe you can't even. Say you take it once or something and go here. There's always this issue, at least I used to have good luck doing this as black, of getting this here really fast and threatening things like knight here, and maybe even knight here. It's a very nice queenside attack, because that queen on c1 is a problem. By the way, that's only equal, but it's easier for black to play, I think. So this is really an issue, what to do about queen there, because usually what you do is you sacrifice a pawn. And that pawn is extremely dangerous to take because of knight c4. But black can simply play an easy move like that. And then, well, it's hard to say. If white plays here, all of a sudden black's got b5 ideas and takes ideas, and he can come back to b6 sometimes. So this is considered equal, or at least very easy for black to play. So anyway, just that's a little review of why, if white castles, how he can get into some problems. So usually what white does is plays here to give himself a little contact with the queen side and shore up the center. Now here's the question from the viewer, is what to do about bishop e6. And it's difficult. Once you have h3 in, it's more difficult than if you had castled, because castle gives you that extra developmental idea. By the way, I should also show you that because you've played slowly with this move h3, you can't play that, which is often a good theme to get this kind of structure. That often gives you a little advantage. The problem is, look at this move, attacking here and getting your pawn back and giving you a central majority. So that's a problem with h3. If you'd castled in this position, this would be just fine for white, better for white actually. But you haven't castled, so after c5 you can't really take that. And in this case he's asking about c3. So we just looked, okay, bishop e6 is certainly an idea, that's the question, but I just wanted to show you, well in fact let's look at that quickly. Okay, so bishop e6, knight d2. Now I think the thing to do against bishop e6 is go ahead and take this. There's no more knight e4 here, because white will just win a pawn. So I think this position is a good setup. The question is, what's a good setup against bishop e6? And I think this one is. And let me show you what happens here. What happens is probably queen c2. Yeah, the idea is that this pawn structure is kind of nice for white. Let me show you that. Let's have black make a move of some sort. Queen c2, queen b6, rook c8. I don't know. Queen's got to go somewhere. Queen c8 to get rook e8 in. Well, I'll just make a random move pretty much. But the idea is this structure is kind of nice because if black ever plays e5, of course, he's lost this outpost, but otherwise you have more control over the center. And there's these minor pieces are having trouble finding places to go to. See how the bishop's cut off from any good squares, the knight's cut off from good squares. This knight is cut off from good squares. And so white has a little central advantage, and later he can put a knight here aggressively, put rooks on d1, maybe double on the file. It turns out this is a little easier to play for white. It's actually a very small advantage, but that's all you're going to get in the London system, especially against this c5 stuff when you've played h3, because it's so slow. So that's what I would do against that line. I won't show you the main line. He mentions playing knight bd2, and there's several good answers. Queen b6 is just fine here, but I think queen b6 again, you might want to just take this. Might be a good way to play. And then if takes, you do what I just said. You put your queen here and you play for e4. And if he plays queen takes, which is probably the best move, you might get a small advantage with just castling. And again, playing for e4, probably right now. It's hard. This is just a bit, but it's something to play for. It's double-edged. It's the sort of thing you want. It's the London, just because so many London variations can be really, really dull. And this one's nice and double-edged. So, but instead of queen b6, you can take first. And that's really scary. You almost always take that way, or otherwise you have absolutely nothing. You want the open file, and you also don't want to give him all the squares on the queen side. So that's normal. But now queen b6, I think, is the way to do this. And this is tough, because knight g5 was white's basic idea. Chase that away and play knight c4. But in this case, I just think you can't do it. I think you're just dropping that pawn. You can either just take this now, and one reason you can take that is because the usual sequence here is to do something like this, and that allows this move, because that's hanging, and that's hanging. So normally black's queen would be in trouble here, but in this case it doesn't happen. And the other thing is black can simply play here, get out of the way and threaten this, and then take this pawn. So this whole line is not very good for white, is what it amounts to, and that's a problem. So I think the best you could do here is to play d takes c5 anyway after this, and maybe hope for a small advantage too in this kind of position, this dc5 thing. Okay, now going back, the real problem then is, in my opinion, is if black plays this immediately, and that I really can't find a really good answer to, because now knight here is just too late, and there's no dc5 here either. dc5 at this point is just terrible, because this knight's coming out and everything's going to be hanging. So this just isn't working. So it's too late for that. So knight here is a good move, because if he takes it, you can get a big attack going, or at least hope to get a big attack going. But it's again this problem. You can't play. This is the problem, because you played h3. You can't play this nice move knight c4, which is what you'd usually do. You'd go there, and when you took here, you'd trap the queen. But you can't do that because it's check. It's queen takes check, and that's why h3. If you had castled instead of h3, this would be a great position for white. Unfortunately, you can't do that, so you have to come up with something else, and there really isn't anything special because knight here is coming next. So you're losing a pawn. Okay, so queen b6 is a real problem with this particular move order, and this is one reason why people delay, in my opinion, it's probably a reason why people delay h3. So if you're a London player as white, you might want to look into the delayed h3 lines. If you're black, most people play an early h3, and you might want to look into playing the c5 stuff, because this, if you get to this particular position, you're going to be pretty happy. The best move is this, just defending, but in this case, bishop e6 is good again, because you can't play d5, and you don't want to play c4 opening the long diagonal. So what does that mean? That means you're going to take it. Now I have an open file, attacking this twice. Active piece play, and I'm very happy. I mean, black's pretty happy. Might not be much better, but he's certainly not worse. Probably just slightly better. Okay, so we finally got something covered there. Type the full moves. Yeah, you may have to look at this again on YouTube. Oh, the Gleck system. That's cool. Okay, we're going to go way back here. Oh, there's a lot of Gleck systems. That's probably why you're confused. Gleck contributed a lot to opening theory. Yeah, Avro 38, one of the great classics, no question. Classical variation of, I mean, the tournament was. Classical variation of Gleck system. I guess there's a question about that. Well, Kirk's already got a lot of questions in, so again, maybe we'll hit that next week. No, this is not all from the New London book, but I mentioned it already. The book, thank you, John. Yeah, we already talked about that, and I gave everybody the title, and I know you have that book. But these are considerations of move order that I think are extremely important. And I have even more of that, but it's getting so late in the show that I think I'll just move on here. The Gleck system. Yeah, there's quite a few Gleck systems, so we'll talk about that next time. I'm gonna copy and paste this time. Okay, some other interesting questions I got. I want to get to when people send me things, I ought to get serious about them. Here's one that I've been, I think, sitting on for a while, actually. It's very simple. It's a very general question. A friend of mine claims that the Fort Knox variation of the French defense is really good. Is he right? So I've got a game here, and let me show you what the Fort Knox is. The Fort Knox appeals to quite a few people, but mostly lower players. There are some top players that play it. I mean, it's pretty respectable, but maybe fewer than you would think, considering that it's fairly sound. The idea is to play bishop here and then get your knight out, rather than trying to play b6, which weakens a lot of light scores. Whether you play it right away or whether you play it later, there's this problem that, for example, after a check, not immediately necessarily, but you would have to cut off that bishop on the long diagonal anyway, and that can be very nice for white to get aggressive pieces going. And also there's positions where a queen will come out and a knight will come to e5, and there'll be all kinds of problems on that square. So to avoid that, what Gleck came up with is playing, Fort Knox, I'm sorry. And what the Fort Knox system is to play those moves, and then you don't have those weaknesses on the queen side. Okay, so I'm just going to show a game with this, talk about a few ideas. So I think what I was going to say as an overall answer is that it is sound enough, but I don't think it gives many positive chances. I think that's what most people think. It tends to give white space and the two bishops, which should be a huge advantage for white, but actually because it's so solid for black and because of the nature of where the pieces are, the pawns and the pieces, I think you'll find that it's reasonably sound. I'm happier with white. I think white has a small advantage, and I just like playing with space and bishops. So let me just show you this game. That's a normal move, that's a normal move. Now this is attacked, and I'm going to show you a funny position. Now this is not the only way you can play this. Let me see. Yeah, let me just do this. Okay, now the idea for black is to play knight here, exchange that knight, and if white exchanges, he's going to take back with a knight. If he has to take back with the queen, it's a little awkward. In fact, in this case, it can be very awkward. Let me show you that. That might be kind of cute, actually. I think there's a trap here. Don't quote me here, but I think this works. You play here. The queen has no squares, right? You might say, okay, you can play here, and then attacking my queen, but then I think we have that move. And the queen's still trapped because if takes, we have check. Yay, I think it worked. That trap comes up in several openings, by the way. A great thing about chess is once you see some structures, often things will work in all structures. By the way, you might want to check that with an engine. But I think this probably wins. I don't know. So anyway, so black's preparing all that, silly aside there, with this move to play here. And white in this game plays this move. And this is the reason I'm showing you this is because I think this is a cool system for white. This is a really interesting way to play. You save your pieces, and now if black ever plays here, which believe it or not is a big, big theme, you're going to take with the knight instead of the queen. Taking with the queen can be a little awkward. Okay, so let me explain, for example. Let's say you don't play that. Let me just show you some typical line with the Fort Knox. We're not going to get to any of these other questions today that I have were sent. I apologize for that. Do you have advice about an opening? I'll try to get to that one too. Okay, yeah, the Grunfeld is a tough thing to play. It's sound, but it's very hard to play. Let me see, where am I here? Oh, I was going to show you this, and just for example, let's say white played here. A very typical black idea here, probably here first, but for example, something like this. This is a typical structure in the Fort Knox variation, and you might think, oh, white's just better, he's got space and two bishops, but for one thing, that's a little vulnerable, but more importantly, the knight's, everything's perfectly placed to stop white's only real break in the center, which is d5. So a talented player can play castles, queen a5, can make this all work. Rook to the center, restraining d5 even more, and targeting d4, and maybe play for this break move, e5, which can be very useful because it can get a firm grip in the center, but it can also force this pawn to commit itself. Let's try a few moves. I'm just going to make, I don't know, maybe I'm going to make slightly inferior moves for white so I can I can make this point. You could even do this right now. And the point is that if white has to play there, he's giving up some squares on this side of the board. And usually black's okay in these positions, although, you know, it depends completely on the exact move order. Here, maybe he's not so great. So maybe he probably wouldn't have played e5 that fast. He'd probably play something like this first. Bring rooks over. But that's a constant idea, to resolve the center and win some nice squares in the center for black. I suspect white's better, but I've seen black draw top professional games with this. The problem is black almost never wins these games. White has to really overextend. And that's why the Fort Knox, one of the reasons the Fort Knox isn't so popular. Anyway, in this game, let me show you this game, because this is cool. This avoids that idea completely for black. And that is black's main idea. It's bishop takes f3 and c6. Or c5, by the way. So in this game, oh yeah, and the idea also is to cover the square. You could castle first, by the way. Castling first makes no difference. And now he castles. The idea here now is we have complete control over this, and I'm sure we've heard our development a little bit. We've moved that knight a lot of times, but we have a little time because black's playing so slowly. Black's playing with all his pieces on a few ranks. That's actually the main move. Notice that if he takes now, which makes sense because at least the queen has to recapture, it's really a different kind of situation because this knight covers that e5 square and d6. So if black plays his normal move, all of a sudden you have some issues on that d6 square. So that's why I like this knight e2, knight e d2 move. I think it's kind of cool. But let me go back to the game. So this time black doesn't take. Black prepares c5, and that's a very good idea. That's a book move that took years to figure out for black, I think, actually. And now he could even try c5. There was a game where white played here, real crazy sacrifice, and he actually won it, but it was very unclear. I think white should simply take, make things simple. If knight takes, you have bishop e5 check, and this is only a small advantage, but I think it's a real advantage. Now you just capture. And let me see if I have a concrete line here. Oh yeah, you chase the bishop back, and think bishop. Let me think what we played first here. Oh yeah, knight d4. That's a cool move. So after knight here, you have captures, which is on this too, as well as the queen. So you don't have time to recapture here. Just retreat there, and guess what? Two bishops, and black has a slightly inferior pawn structure. Black's pieces are nice and active, but white can consolidate on the queen side. Rook b1, b3, those kinds of moves. And then white has two bishops, and this is how you win endgames, is positions like this. So even though you're not much better, you're going to win a lot of games if you play well from this position, and it's great practice too. So that's what happens if he plays what we normally are used to, which is this bishop takes move. Okay, so now white has quite an attack. I don't like knight g5 at all as a move, but it does lead to a nice little attack. Really, he should just go ahead with the obvious move here, and then capture with the knight. Or even capture the queen. In this exact position, this is good because it's got extra threats, so there's no time to ruin the pawn structure effectively. That's a little obscure comment, but it turns out white's better if black takes. just have to take my word for that. So he should play that, but instead he plays for an attack, and we'll go over this pretty quickly. Black counterattacks, that was his whole plan, and he shouldn't. He should actually try and lure white into doing something like c4 with some sort of attack, and I think it comes out fine for black. That's what white was wanting, but I don't think it's a good... I think that, and this turns out badly for tactical reasons. The bishop doesn't have anywhere obvious to go, and he ends up getting a big attack. After that's a nice move, because it attacks that square. And you can't go here. Does everybody see why you can't go there? Check. Has to go there. Check. Wins. That's actually mate in 2 moves. So I guess that's why you can't go there. That was silly. So he plays g6, and now this very nice move. Now, by the way, you could have gotten a small advantage by just taking and bringing the knight back, just for the record, which shows that you've already got an advantage. But this is even better. I'll show you this because it's fun. It's always fun to see tactical games. And blasting away now. So white's got 3 pawns for the piece, because if he takes here, then the rook's going to fall on f7. So we've already got 3 pawns for the piece. Rook is also kind of trapped. So white actually already has a material advantage, but he also has space. So this is a very nice position. Now black does have the bishops and minor pieces, so it's never easy. But white does something funny here. I think that's probably not the right move. Let me just show you what he could have done. He could have played this move, real simple move. And then after knight takes, just play here, getting the piece back again. And now this is a very easy win. Notice these 3 passed pawns, and white's getting all his material. And he can also just go over and attack somewhere. Just bring all the pieces over there. So that's kind of a cute little victory for white, or what should have been a victory. Okay. Yes, John says you have to know a lot of theory. That's absolutely true. To get a slightly worse endgame, that's probably true. It's tough. It's tough with the Grunfeld. All right, so that's that game. Let me go back to the chat and see what I can address there. I have one other game to show you, but I think this is a good place to stop with showing you stuff. We got a few minutes to look at some other chat issues. So let me just clear this out, because we might have to show something on the board. Okay, now I'm going to go back up and see what I can find, because I ignored you pretty much this week. But I hope what I showed was kind of interesting. I think that London stuff is fascinating, actually, because so many people play it on both sides. Okay, what about recent things? Types of full moves. Is this London book? Do you have advice? Advice about opening against d4, which gives black dynamic unbalanced play. Yeah, of course the Grunfeld is dynamic, and of course the King's Indian is it's hard to get active play with the Nim's Indian without giving up a disadvantage, but really anything unbalanced, I mean, I could tell you one easy one because I wrote a whole book on it, is the Benoni. Most people think it's got a bad reputation. Well, it does have a bad reputation, but only relative to the other ones. If you know what you're doing, it's definitely playable, and it gives you a very unbalanced game. I mean, about as unbalanced as you can get. So it's basically queen side versus king side, and central tension, or central imbalance. Let me just say that one thing about the Benoni is it's a good thing to play in this position, especially if you're going to play in Nim's Indian, in this position here, playing this way, because then white doesn't have any of these systems with f3 and f4 that can be really difficult to play against. So you don't have to learn that much to play this Benoni. And this Benoni is also sounder. You'll find a lot of very good players playing this order. You won't find that many good players playing the other order, which would be this one. Of course, partly you have the Nim's Indian as an option, because white has so many new ways to set up here that are dangerous when he doesn't have his knight here. That doesn't mean any of them are any good, really. It doesn't mean black can't defend, but it's just a lot more to learn, and it's a lot more dangerous. So what you could do is combine repertoires, which an awful lot of grandmasters have done, and play bishop b4 in this position, which is a Nim's Indian, and which can get very sharp. It can also be very positional, so it's a combination. It's a good double-edged. Did you ask for double-edged or dynamic unbalanced? I think, yeah, dynamic is unclear. That depends on what white does, how dynamic it gets. But I would say unbalanced and very often dynamic. So yeah, if you want, and it's also the soundest of the d-pawn defenses that has that imbalance to it. The Queen's Gambit declined is also solid, and so is the Slav, but they're not always unbalanced. So the Nimzo would be a pretty good choice if you're a little scared of the King's Indian because it's so tactical, and it does require a fair amount of memorization. So if you don't like that one, and you're not into the Grunfeld, which you already said, that might be a good choice to do that. And if they go there, you can play the Bogo Indian, which you usually actually it can be incredibly boring. And but at the same time is fun, and it's unbalanced, and there's so many systems in the Bogo. You can pick so many ways to play it as black, all of them slightly plus equals. There's the Queen's Indian, which may even be equal in the end, but also can be a little bit sterile. Or you can go crazy and play the Benoni, in which case you've got to learn some theory, but it's a lot of fun, and it's dynamic, and people don't know it as well as white also, because they're so used to playing against the Bogo Indian and the Queen's Indian. That's why they play knight f3, is to play against these two moves. Or the Queen's Gambit. They don't mind playing a Queen's Gambit. Okay. Hope that helped a little bit. But I think the real answer to the question is King's Indian if you can stand it, if you trust it, and if you don't mind. Or Nimzo Indian if you want something for sure sound and solid. And the Benoni question, the Benoni part of it was a little unfair. That's sort of my preference to hit a really crazy game. But if you don't like that, play the Nimzo Indian, and then in this position maybe play one of these Bogo Indians. And then all you have to do is learn a couple moves, because if you play the Nimzo Indian, you've already learned knight c3. And a little hard to describe, but against this move you can play all kinds of moves. There's this move, this move, this move, and there's capturing followed by all kinds of moves like d5, castles and d5, and there's it just goes on and on and on. So hopefully I gave a little bit of help there. Okay. It's hard at my level. Problem with the Nimzo is everyone knows how to avoid it. They do. What does that mean? Does that mean knight f3? Why don't you tell me how they avoid it? Let's just see. Like starting here? Alan, give me a move order to avoid the Nimzo. I assume you mean after this, because you talked about the Grunfeld, so that means you've already gotten that far. Is it just knight f3? Because there's obviously plenty of stuff. I mean, I showed you some things you can do against that, and I think you shouldn't be afraid of those things. But I don't think there's that many ways to avoid it. There's g3. We already talked about g3 before. You can play Benoni against that too, if you want to. You can also play bishop b4 check followed by bishop b7. You can play Catalan if you know it, especially if g3 is played too early. Sometimes it can be fun to play c5. What else? What else can white do to avoid the Nimzo Indian? It's not so easy, is it? What else does white have here to avoid the Nimzo Indian? Not much, I think. Yeah, try standard Benoni. That's really a thought. Yeah, knight f3, exactly. And then after knight f3, as I say, we've got these options of the Queen's Indian, the Bogo, the Queen's Gambit declined, and the Benoni. So you've got 4 options here, at least, maybe more that I haven't thought of. And they're all pretty reasonable. The most radical one for having some real fun is that, but it's a little riskier, of course. And the solidest one is probably the Queen's Indian, or the Bogo Indian if you want to play it slowly. And if you play it slowly, you're going to get a small disadvantage. It's kind of boring. If you play it, you can play it fairly actively, but then you probably still get a small disadvantage, but it might be at least more interesting. Okay. A4 seems to have killed the Benko. Good point. Yeah, so if we talk about second moves, that's a good point. We can talk about second moves like that, for example. And yeah, and I think the Benko is not in very good shape right now, maybe for a couple reasons, actually. On the other hand, it always seems to be revived at some point. And A3. A3 when? A3 now, maybe. A3 here. Yeah, which really is just a bad Queen's Gambit, because actually the pawn can actually hurt you there. So it's too early for A3, unfortunately. Actually, almost every opening is probably better once A3 is in. That's not true. That's silly. The Queen's Indian, you just transpose. Well, that's really the problem, isn't it? But I was going to say, there's also Benoni. You just force him to commit, and if he plays here, A3 doesn't fit very well. Yeah, it's too bad. Everybody would love to play A3 there. we all think and dream about playing A3 there, but it's just not a good move. So, as you probably already know, I'm sure. All right. Anybody else? Anything else here? I could go up to the top again and talk about a few of these things. We got maybe a few minutes. Why not? Why not? I'm going to steal a few minutes. Knight FD7. I could have shown that London with Knight FD7, so we could look at that a little bit. Maybe next week. All these things I'll consider sort of questions to address next week. And I won't get to all of them necessarily. A6 in the Slav. Okay, what's the most interesting of these questions that I can do quickly? That's always an issue, isn't it? Yeah, definitely send an email to me at any time. Ask I am Watson at chessclub.com, and that would be actually really nice. You can send me other things too. You can send me your own games, comments. It doesn't have to be a question necessarily. Anything that might be fun for the show. Comments on books. We can talk about books and talk about that on the show. Yeah, which of these is quick is the problem. Do you have advice against? Yeah, we already looked at that. Okay, unfortunately, all these are kind of general. Oh, here we got something about Kasparov. And was it Kasparov who introduced the Benko to the King's Indian defense? Well, their B5 has been around for years in the King's Indian defense, longer than the Benko was popular. So Kasparov did play some B5s in the King's Indian, maybe fewer than most people, but he did have some lines with that, where he'd play an early B5. Most of the main lines of the King's Indian, the B5 doesn't really work very well. So sometimes there's A6s and C6s and B5s, but the Benoni-like C5s tend not to work that well. Now, how to illustrate that? Well, there's knight f3, there's the H3 systems. What are we looking at? Probably just the regular system. Oh, here's one that does work. I might as well look at one that actually kind of does work. This kind of B5 is often more successful. Maybe not yet. Maybe after, for example. I mean, you can play it here, but frankly, I think white just comes out better here. This is a long idea, but one of the ideas is you play A4, and if queen A5, you have bishop D2. And then you go like this, and you castle, and you even play queen E1 and walk over to the king's side. So that B5, even though some people still play it once in a while, I don't think it's very good. So that's the main move, right? And B5 here is a whole different story. That's very complicated, and that might even be okay for black. But it's controversial. At this point, Spassky played this, I think against Carries or something. It was the stem game, and of course there have been thousands of games since then. And then he ended up taking this anyway with the bishop, I believe, and then gave up this pawn. And maybe white's slightly, it's the old thing, white's slightly better playable, but it's slightly better. Bronstein played it in Zurich out of the King's Indian. Well, depends which King's Indian. Oh, I'll have to be more specific maybe. I don't remember that exact game. But regular King's Indians is tending not to work very well these days anyway. For example, let's see if I can come up with an example of that. Okay, so how about, well, the Averbach. There's an idea. How about the Averbach, which goes like this and this. And for example, should we throw in ace? We don't have to throw in H6. We might want to throw in H6, but that kind of move. And I think white's very happy with what's coming out of this. It used to be played quite a bit. What other lines are there? I'm trying to think if there are any in the classical with this kind of thing where you play B5. There's always the things like, okay, the Samish has a lot of B5s. There we go. The Samish has a bunch of B5s. I'm not boring everybody. I'm probably boring everybody to death here. But these lines can have B5s in many different forms. And they're even fancy B5s. Let me show you the most fancy B5 from recent theory. It's great fun. It goes like this. Now that's attacked, and so white goes here. And then black will counterattack here. Not always immediately, sometimes after E6. And then here. And white plays, is this the one I'm interested in? No, this is not the one I'm interested in. I'm interested in the immediate H5, I guess. Yeah, let's see if I can get this right. Here, E6. And now it looks like F4 is going to drive the knights back, and you're going to win the D pawn, and the knight's going to have to go here. But instead he sacrifices a piece here. This is a wonderful piece sacrifice here. There's a B5 for you. It's not thematic. It's not like the Benko at all, but just thought I'd throw that in there. And the idea is just to crack open the center. Your whole piece down, but you have pressure on this file and this file, and the king can't get castled because of that knight, and maybe you have bishop g4, maybe you have a knight out. It's really fun. Played by some of the top players in the world, so both sides have played this, so that means some people think white's better maybe, and other people think that black's fine. And I don't know why I should do that. This is a random show, right? We're in random time. We're in the timeout period. overtime. So, but what about b5s in the same-ish otherwise? Usually b5 these days is combined with a6 and maybe even c6. Kasparov played it in the same-ish in, let me see what variation he played in the same-ish. He played it in, against Timon, for example, he played it. Now, how did that go? Okay, that's if he doesn't play knight e2. That's after this. The old same-ish line. Now, how did that go? Oh, no, I'm sorry. He played in the e5 lines. Well, how weird. Yeah, he played it, for example, in this kind of line. And c6 moves. I don't know about the timing, but then usually the old system of white would do is play bishop d3, knight e2, castle queenside, and play for these moves. And in response to that, Kasparov was playing this kind of thing, that kind of b5 idea, which is, can be a lot of fun. And there's countless different things you can do. Here's the old same-ish with knight c6, which has had some b5 ideas. For example, a6. Well, you can play b5 without anything else going on. Just play b5. But in terms of this b5 against c5 thing, you can get that as well. And how can you get that? You can get that by playing. I'll show you maybe an example. See if I can show you a good example of that. I'm trying to remember. Oh, this kind of thing, for example. There, and then he challenges that. And black plays here, and black's actually doing just fine here. Yeah, okay, that's actually pretty easy. Maybe this one's more interesting. Captures. Ah, sorry, haven't got it exactly. There's a b5 that was played. Maybe it's this pawn sacrifice with that followed by b5. It's been played a little bit. Okay, what do we got here? Still alive here. Thank you. Russian Championship last round. Yeah, if you can, you can always just type the games in. The famous game is obviously the Tupolev game. Okay, why don't you just type the moves for that in, like the opening moves of that. I'll probably know it. Yeah, you can just type the first moves in. We've got time. I was going to say there's that line where black plays queen a5 and b5. Maybe that's the one you mean, where you sacrifice your queen. That's a famous line too. White plays knight d5, and black just sacrifices his queen by taking the knight. I wonder if he means that one. Yana, if you could tell me which one, that would help. I think you're on the right track, because we're actually looking for that structure. We're really looking for the structure with c5, d5, and then b5 at some point. And I think the one famous line. Okay, I'll show you a famous line. Let's see if we can do this. Like here, it's black's move. Let's say this kind of thing. Here, white goes here, black goes here, white goes, let's say, maybe castles here. How are we going to get knight d5 out of this? Oh, obviously we're going to play this way at some point. Yeah, sorry about this. I'm trying to get a fancy b5 in, but b5 is already kind of a threat in this position. White would probably play here to defend his a pawn, I suspect. And you could play b5 here just like you do in a Benko, and just get your pieces out. Bring your rook over to that side of the board. What I wanted to show is something much more fun. Oh, I know what I was going to show. Okay, finally I've got it. We don't play d5. We just play. Same thing, knight here, and it's this line where black plays there, which has always been interesting. None used to play this. It could still be played. I don't think it usually is, but it really could be. This is the fun line. This is a Bronstein line too, where white plays here and thinks he has sort of a trap, because after this he plays this nice move, threatening queen takes queen, but if queen takes, there's knight takes. But instead black says, I don't care about that. I'm just going to take this guy and give up my queen for 2 pieces. And it's actually Black is so active. He's got these files that are going to be opened up on the queen side. The king's rather bare. These pieces aren't developed. And it turns out that this position is really wonderful fun. I don't know who stands better theoretically, because I don't know if it's even still played anymore. But this is a fun line. Yana, do you have any? Can you throw that in there? Someone want to throw Tukmakov Kasparov into the chat? You can just copy and paste the moves in. Okay, it's an Averbach. Which Averbach? Could be any of a million Averbachs. So I don't know. I don't know which one. Yeah, so I don't know, and we can't do it unless you give us moves. It's really easy to just look it up and paste it in if you want to. You can just paste it into the chat, and I bet I'll recognize it. I think I know all Kasparov games in the King's Indian, but I don't remember the exact move orders for these things. Okay, so what else do we have here? Anyway, maybe that's a good place to stop, unless someone has other things. No one looked up the Russian Championship last round. I'll do it. I'll do it for next week. I bet I know the game. I just offhand I can't think which one it is. Okay. Hey everybody. Hope I didn't bore you to death at the end there, but at least we got to a lot of the questions that people sent, and I think a lot of the stuff's kind of interest because you can play it as white and black, which I think is kind of funny. Chess is a fight. Oh, I didn't see this part. Chess as a fight. There's My Struggle. Something that he calls the translation is My Struggle in our book, and I've looked at it. There's a ton of Kasparov books, of course, and I haven't read any of them cover to cover, but I think the one you're talking about there's also Child of Change, but I think there's one that's just called, real early book, it was called something like My Struggle, and it sounds like Chess is a Fight is the same one. That goes way back, but anyway, I'm sure the game's easy to find, and thank you for pointing it out, and I will definitely look it up, get to it next week, and we'll talk about it at least briefly. Please send me the questions, because I'm not getting as many as I used to. So ask IamWatson@chessclub.com, or prepare stuff for the chat, or message me at John L. Watson if you're on ICC. Thanks everybody, and I have fun with this, and I hope you guys have fun talking with each other. Your comments are incredibly intelligent and knowledgeable, so I think that's so nice because it makes me more interested. So thanks everybody, and I'll see you next week.